Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the DUBCAST with Dubside. I'm Andrew Lazaga.
And I'm Dubside.
So today, before we start the DUBCAST, I thought we could spend some time talking about a recent tragic kayaking death that occurred this past Tuesday. It occurred outside of Everett, Washington. You know the area, don't you?
Yes, I do. I lived in Lake Stevens for a while. I used to paddle that area quite a bit with my folding kayak and figured out the buses and stuff. So where did this occur exactly?
Well, they say it happened right outside of Jetty Island.
Oh, yeah. I know that area.
Okay. So Jetty Island is a 2-mile-long human-made island that acts as a breakwater for the Everett Marina.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize this, but I was just reading about it, and it said that it's made out of sediment that was dredged from the Snohomish River.
Yeah. Well, that river coming out of there's Snohomish Town and there's Lake Stevens up there. There's a couple of branches, so it all forms some sort of a delta or emerging. And there's some cool paddling area through there. It's all tidal saltwater, but so as that comes into the bay there's some sections where they sunk old barges, old like wooden barges, to hold the sediment in place. So at really low tide, it's fun to paddle out there. You can see the ends of these barges, the wooden construction of how you make a barge out of wood. And that goes over towards where that Jetty Island is. It's Puget Sound, so their weather can kick up. It's somewhat serious water out there, and things can happen. So when I do that, there are buses up in some of the rivers there, and then you can get out. There's a bus from right there at Everett off of Jetty Island. And farther down, there's that was it the Mukilteo or whatever the name of that ferry is. So you've got Everett on the mainland, and then across the sound, there's Whidbey Island and Camano Island over there, and it's like a mile or two to cross over. And so the ferries that run to those islands, they've all got that ticket pricing structure where you pay to go over there, but you don't pay to come back. So you're effectively paying double the rate to go over there, and then they know you're going to come back somehow. So when you come back, they don't charge anything.
Okay.
But if you're like me and you paddle over, you don't pay anything to get over there because you're paddling. Then you get on the ferry to come back, and you don't pay anything to come back. So it's a free ride.
Oh, that's cool. So you done that from Mukilteo to Clinton?
Yeah. Well, there's this community bus service that runs on Whidbey Island. At least this goes back 10 years, so it's probably still the same. And even back then, the buses are free.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah, you get over to Whidbey, and then you find a spot where you can land properly, and then you come up and you get out to where the road is and where there's a bus stop, and you ride that bus to the ferry for free, and then you ride the ferry back for free. It's a nice way to go.
Yeah, that sounds like a great trip.
Yeah. And now if talking about accidents and stuff out there, now I can recall one time I came out of that, I think it's the Snohomish River through the top of Everett there, and you're coming right out to Jetty Island, past where the wooden barges are underwater, and it was really strong wind from the north one time, and I came down. I don't know, maybe it was wind from like the south. I was coming around the top of Everett, and I wanted to get to right there. You come around the edge, and then there's a ways to go, and there's that marina there, which the Jetty Island acts as a barrier for.
Yeah.
There's a boat ramp there, and there's a bus that comes to there, which is what I was looking for. And the wind was really strong, and it was a headwind. I could have turned around and gone all the way back, but it would take me longer. So it was just to fight this headwind for maybe a quarter mile or something to get to the boat ramp. And it's in by the shore there. It's fairly shallow, so it's blowing up these whitecaps, and this had to be easily more than 20 mile per hour, plus the gusts on top of that. And I remember cars stopping once or twice, or just somebody just looking like, this guy looks like he's having trouble out there. But, I stayed upright, and the water's actually somewhat shallow there. But to fight my way all the way through there took more than half an hour to get that short distance. Which is to say that the weather can kick up in that area pretty quickly. Do you have any other details on this mishap?
Well, let me read through the article that was published in the Everett Herald.
Okay.
Okay. Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. Drowned Everett kayaker found near Hat Island identified. A U.S. Navy crew found the body of a drowned man Wednesday in Puget Sound off the west side of Hat Island. He was later identified as James Leisman, 37, of Everett. Authorities believe he was a kayaker reported to be in distress the previous day, according to Everett police. Leisman's body was recovered around 9 a.m. Wednesday, Everett police officer Kirby Duncan said. The Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office identified him later Wednesday and classified the cause of death as hypothermia and drowning. Someone called 911 at 12:37 p.m. Tuesday, but the dispatcher couldn't communicate with the caller because of wind, Duncan said. The dispatcher could tell it was a call for help and determined that the location of the cell phone was near Jetty Island. In a Facebook post, the Tulalip tribe said search and rescue teams found a kayak with no one in it about 500 yards off Priest Point. So Priest Point is just north of Everett.
Yeah. I took the bus once up to that Tulalip area. You can get in up there. Yeah. So on those details, I can pretty much surmise it's quite likely the guy was out by himself. The weather kicked up. It got too strong. He capsized. He didn't have a roll. Had trouble getting back in his kayak. Couldn't get back in his kayak. So if that call was from him, he pulled out his cell phone to try to call, but they couldn't even understand him. But they knew he was in trouble.
Yeah.
And you even if he had a thin wetsuit on or something and wind and stuff, your time is limited if you can't get out of the water. And then hypothermia sets in, and then that's it.
Yep. Yeah, and that's typical of the type of sea kayaking deaths you see out here. It's usually some combination of high winds, high waves, inability to control the kayak, capsize, and person leaving their boat. And it also could be compounded by lack of proper equipment and cold temperatures, and this time of year, limited daylight.
Yeah,
because now it's like the sun sets at 4:30 p.m.
Yeah.
They did initiate a search for him, but they had to call it off at about 5 p.m. because it got dark.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And they didn't find his body until the next morning. So.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like I don't know if I related the episode in the DUBCAST yet, but where I got caught without my lights in November. Here we are. We just switched the clocks forward.
Yeah.
And the guy, you have in your mind, you're like, I'll paddle and come back before dark or something like that. And then that dark creeps right up on you with an hour ahead of time. And so it's easy to say, well, if the guy had a roll, he would have made it. But if all your backup is based on one thing, you're much more liable to have problems than if you have multiple backups. So for all we know, he could have rolled a couple times successfully. But if the waves kept at it, in the really rough stuff, maybe on that one, after a couple, he missed it and went over and couldn't get back up.
Yep. Well, our condolences go out to the family of Mr. Leisman, and it's really a tragic, unfortunate story. But I'm always on the lookout for these kayaking accident reports, and I'm sure you're interested in them too because they serve as a reminder of the risks of being out on the water. And you can always learn something from it.
Yes.
It's always a good opportunity to review our habits and see if there's some areas where we can improve in terms of minimizing risk. Because sea kayaking is an inherently risky activity.
Yeah. And I suppose we should say right here that we are not offering professional advice here that if you follow, you'll be totally safe. So this is disclaimer that anything we say is not to be held against us. You're on your own out there and have to be responsible for your own safety.
Yes. And, you might even say that this podcast is just for purely entertainment purposes.
Yes, you can say that. Yeah.
Okay. So I put together a few rules or guidelines, I should say, because as rules are often broken. And I thought we'd present them in no particular order and we can talk about them.
Yeah.
Okay, so number one, never paddle alone. And this is what I was taught.
I've heard that one, yeah.
So never paddle alone. What do you think about that one?
Well, I and plenty of other people break that one all the time. But well, go through the rest of your list, and then I'll discuss how I address that concern.
Oh, okay. Okay, number 2, leave a float plan.
Okay.
So always tell someone where you're going, what your plan is, so that they can find you in case you don't return.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add to that, when you're planning trips, you should always mark an escape route.
Mm-hmm.
Place where you can land, where you can take out downwind in case you don't complete your trip.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 3, always wear a dry suit.
All right.
What do you think?
Well, in the summertime when it's really warm, dry suit can get rather uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, all these are good ideas, but have exceptions and qualifications. So I'll come back to that. Go ahead.
Okay. Number 4, always carry a communication device.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
can
agree with that.
I mean, you mentioned VHF radios.
Yeah.
I used to carry the Spot satellite beacon.
Yeah. Okay.
Flares and lights, because you might be stuck out there at night.
Yeah.
What impressed me about this particular incident was that they were able to locate him by pinging his cell phone.
Yeah. Okay. Back in the day, my information may be dated, but I had known that the Coast Guard from 50 or more years ago have location device equipment to hone in on VHF radio frequencies. So if you're calling the Coast Guard, their equipment is set up so they can find you.
Oh, wow.
That way. But they do not, at least back then, they did not have anything similar for cell phones. So which you're having the cell phone thinking you're covered there doesn't give you the same capability as with the VHF radio, where they can hone in on you. Now that may be different now. Now, advanced technology, I'm not sure if the Coast Guard has access to the other stuff, but I think the 911 operators they can locate cell phones, like, can't they? So I don't know if the Coast Guard has got the same things, but of course there are areas where the cell phone coverage is spotty, but the Coast Guard is covering those. So the other factor with the radio, calling for distress might apply in this case. So you're on your cell phone, you're calling 911 to say, hey, I'm in big trouble. Now, as it sounds like this case was here, they had trouble hearing him over the wind and couldn't really get all the details from him. Because on a 911 call, the only person you're talking to is a 911 operator. Now, with a VHF radio, every vessel in the area hears what you're saying. If there's somebody close by, they can come in and help. It's like a broadcast call to all vessels kind of thing. That, a Mayday call like that. And so somebody might have been able to communicate better, could hear better, if they were closer on the radio signals, or, just started looking around, and might have seen somebody in the distance, get the binoculars out and look for somebody, and that much faster than a 911 operator who's trying to figure out, what's the problem, where is this guy, what's going on, And in fact, the latest, the Channel 70 digital selective calling. Actually, there was a guy in Florida recently. He did a VHF radio class, and I was hanging out with him. It was pretty cool. But the Channel 70 digital selective calling functions. If you have a radio with that capability, you push your distress. It comes up with a menu, and it says the nature of the distress, which is man overboard, a vessel on fire, or drifting in the open channel, shipping channel. There's like 5 or 6 different choices.
Wow.
So you make your selection, and then you push the button. And one digital beep will convey the nature of the stress, what you selected from the menu, your GPS position, because the radio has a built-in GPS, the time of that call, and then you've got, if you set it up properly, what's called an MMSI number, which is like a license plate number for your vessel. On file somewhere, the Coast Guard has that information, so they know what size, what color vessel they're looking for. So with one little digital beep, all that information is conveyed, and they can immediately start the search. They know where to look, based on the wind, they can figure out where you're going to go. They know what size vessel you are and what the problem is. Now, to convey all that verbally over the radio is going to take 2 or 3 minutes, and with the wind blowing, that's going to be trouble. So that channel 70 is a great function. Now, having said that, the guy in Florida I was talking to, it's his recommendation, because my VHF recommendations are 15 or 20 years out of date, but he said he didn't know any kayaker who bothered with that channel 70 stuff. Radios with that capability cost a bit more and a little bit larger. That was his view on it, not to bother. But
oh, really?
You can still call channel 16 and go through that whole process. But
well, I like the idea.
Plugged into that.
I'll have to look into that. I think that's pretty cool. I mean,
there are all these other functions as well. You can do a selective call to call just people by your friends and their special number. And so that digital beep goes out, and just their radios will come on and say, this person's trying to call you. It's almost like an email kind of a thing.
Wow.
Whereas, in the old days, you had to listen to the hailing channel. Everybody's, this is so-and-so, it's so-and-so out there. And you're hearing all the other, well, for you, it's just junk mail, because you're not the guy they're calling, and you're not the guy who's calling, so you don't even want to hear that, but you have to listen to it to just hear all these messages. Well, the digital thing has eliminated all that. If the beep is not to your number, it doesn't even ring on your radio. And then you can also, I've read this in the manuals. I haven't gotten one of these radios to try it myself because I don't have other people with the same radio. But another feature is that when you get a ring from somebody else with from their number, which means they're out there somewhere on the water, wherever, your radio can then determine where they are and give you a compass bearing on what direction to go to get to them.
Wow.
I haven't talked to anybody who actually used this and seen how it works in practice, but the capability, that's what the manuals are saying. You got a whole kayaking crew and want to go through all the process to set all that up. It has some capabilities. Well, let's get back to the rest of your points on your list before I critique all of them.
Oh, okay. Okay. Number 5, don't leave your kayak if you capsize and wet exit, because it makes you more visible, and it provides some flotation so that you can keep your body out of the water.
Yeah. At the onset of hypothermia, first your fingers can't hold on anything because they're so numb. You may very well be too cold to even hang on to the kayak. And then, of course, hypothermia also impairs your brain functions as you get colder and colder. So that's the unfortunate reality there. Trying to stay with your kayak is definitely a good idea.
Mm-hmm. You'll read about these incidents where people will try to swim for it.
Oh, yeah.
The kayak is swamped, and they just think that they can swim to shore, in high winds and current.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6, always check the weather. I think this is actually probably the most important point. In this particular incident, this happened on Tuesday, but on Monday, there were warnings of storms coming.
Yeah.
This is the Seattle Times article from November 8th, so the day before. Brewing storm to sock Pacific Northwest, upper Midwest. They said, let me go down here. Okay. The storm's first act comes Monday night into Tuesday, when it will drag an atmospheric river, a narrow swath of exceptionally moist air that produces heavy precipitation into the Pacific Northwest. The weather on Tuesday, if you go back to the data collected for Hat Island, just off of of Everett there.
Yeah, it's off between Jetty Island when you're going across towards Whidbey Island on the other side. Hat Island's in the middle there. It's not. I don't think it's inhabited. It's all just forested. It's a nice looking island out there.
Well, there's a weather station there, and it recorded winds from the southwest at 43 miles per hour.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, around 1 o'clock. Around 1 o'clock on Tuesday, which is they got the 911 call around 12:30 or so.
Wow.
So 43 miles per hour.
Yeah.
If you knew that there were going to be a storm, like, why would you be out there? That's the big question that goes unanswered. Of course, some experienced kayakers like to go in those conditions.
Yeah, but they have to know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's a big question for me. It's like, why would you be out there at that time?
Yeah.
Any comments on the rest
Sure,
of the?
sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in general, if you have multiple backup plans, you're far safer than just one go-to emergency procedure. So you'll think, well, I'll just take my cell phone, and if anything happens, I'll just call the cell phone. If for some reason that doesn't work, we're here like it was too windy for them to hear what he was saying, or if the battery's died, then you're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So having a number of different approaches or ways of addressing the situation. So I'll give you, and you sort of have to make your own strategy. I'm recalling Brian Schultz. I don't know if I've mentioned his name yet on the DUBCAST. He's the guy in Oregon who builds many kayaks, and he once did a presentation at the Delmarva event in Delaware, and this goes back many years. And he said, as far as dressing for the condition, they tell you have to dress for the water temperature, not the air temperature. But everybody knows, you'll be sweating if you dress for the water temperature on a nice warm day. And his thought was, you pretty much have to weigh the conditions with your experience and sort of figure out on your own what you're going to do, which is, doesn't make it a real simple, straightforward answer. But
right.
So that relies on experience. If you don't have much experience, you need to overcompensate and do all the extra safety stuff. But as you progress and develop more and more knowledge of how things going, you sort of have to set your own method. So to look at the specific your recommendations here, kayaking alone, I do that all the time. But my addressing that relies on, I don't go out in big, huge, 5-mile crossing kind of things. When starting in Philadelphia, you're not more than a mile from land. That's one thing there. And as I've mentioned before, I would always be overdressed, wearing too much, and couldn't paddle fast because I had too much on. So if I fell and I had enough time to go, I over time developed a fairly solid roll. So even a hand roll, do all sorts of combat exercise, rolling up. If you drop your paddle, you can roll up with your hands and rolling on both sides and rolling with one arm, that kind of thing. So pretty sure that I'm not going to have to come out of the kayak and get back up. So that's got me covered there. I would generally like your recommendation about the communication device. Yeah, I would just generally always carry your VHF marine radio. Put it on your PFD, a waterproof radio on the PFD. So even if you do come out of the kayak, it's with you. It's not in a kayak hatch somewhere. Yeah. My feeling was that the radio as a preventative device, not as a reaction to disaster, does you much better. So monitoring, of course, the weather, you have it set for the weather alert as well as the Coast Guard. Something really kicks up suddenly, you're going to know about it. The Coast Guard is going to give you a bulletin as well as the weather alert thing is going to come on. And then that allows you to avoid situations like these 40-mile-an-hour winds that you might not have expected. The float plan is a little bit different from the way I handle that. Is telling people you'll be out and where you're going is a good idea. In my case, with the folding kayak on public transportation, I could only really do the most general type of plan because I hadn't exactly figured out where I was going to come back from. I might be thinking about starting one spot, but if things look different or the wind shift or something, I might go somewhere else. In some sense, that increases your safety because, if you've got to come back to where you started from, where your car is parked, and the wind kicks up the wrong way or the current is stronger than you thought, you're going to put yourself an extra effort and time and energy and into rougher conditions trying to get back to where your car is. And only when it's really bad and you really have to throw in the towel, I think, let me just drift over here and see if I can get out here and figure out what to do then. Whereas far sooner than that, I would just say, the wind's a little strong. Let me just go down this way and I'll take out over here and get this bus stop down here. Yeah. So that would increase my safety there. Now, to tell somebody, here's where I'm going to paddle, exactly what I'm going to be doing, I can't say that because I don't know. But it's counterbalanced by the fact that I can improvise on the spot to avoid bad situations. And then when you say staying with the kayak, if you got a solid roll, that pretty much keeps you with the kayak. Dry suits, I haven't done the full dry suit DUBCAST yet, but I use a 7mm wetsuit in the wintertime, and some maybe a paddling jacket on top of that, and then the tunic on top of that, which will keep me warm. And I actually, you don't have to think about what would you do if if you capsize, I do capsize. I practice rolling in the wintertime, so I'm well versed in what to do if the kayak goes over.
I do a lot of paddling alone, of course, and I wanted to talk about my reasons to justify it.
Okay.
If the person you're paddling with is not well trained in rescues or practices bad judgment, then they actually may be more of a liability for you.
True.
And one thing that I learned paddling with a big group of people, once in a while these kayaking clubs will get together and they'll arrange a group paddle. One group I went with, there may have been a dozen people there, but no one was looking out for each other.
Yeah.
And I would see some people paddling, a mile behind us, and people wouldn't even notice if people were missing. So sometimes being in a big group, you might as well be paddling alone. It just gives you this false sense of security.
Yeah.
And the same coach who told me, you should never paddle alone, was also the same one who told me that you have to beware of your leaders because your leaders can lead you to your death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have to confirm their calculations, their reading of the data and their decisions as well. You should be able to make those decisions on your own.
I don't know if I did this exercise when I taught kayaking classes, ACA classes many years ago. If you took a group of a number of people, beginners and things, you could stop people and ask each person individually, where are you going right now? And in a typical group, most people would say, well, all I know is I'm following this guy in front of me. Which means if they got separated, they'd have no idea where to go to get back. It's just like, well, the guy in front of me, that's my only beacon.
Yeah.
Which is not the way to go. You want to have some sense of, maps and charts and compass directions and a general idea of where you are and where you came from.
See, so you need to paddle alone and practice those skills of planning your own trips and collecting the data beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Analyzing these things is a very good way to build your skills and learn from other people's mistakes rather than your own mistakes. And so Sea Kayaker magazine, which is no longer published, used to have a series where they would take an accident very much like these and analyze it in detail. And they had my friend George Grunseth would be one of the people who would dissect these things. And so they printed a book many years back called Deep Trouble. And there was all these collection of incidents, and a lot of them happening right up there at Puget Sound where we're talking about. You have beautiful water, lovely place to paddle, but these are serious conditions and things can happen. And often people with no experience just think it's a great day to paddle. Let me just go out there, and the weather kicks up or the current takes them into the shipping channel, and then you read an article about them. It's very insightful. They really break it down and look at, what could this person have done better? What would have prevented this? Where do they go wrong in the whole analysis?
Deep Trouble is a classic. And then there's also the sequel, More Deep Trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Great book to read around the campfire when you're out kayaking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, if anyone else out there would like to put in their 2 cents and share their thoughts about kayaking accidents and maybe even their own experiences, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
All right. So without further ado, let's get on to DUBCAST number 17.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to the DUBCAST with Dubside. This is DUBCAST number 17, in which I will tell you about practicing throwing a harpoon for the Greenland competition, and in Greenland competition, some things that happened during racing and rolling. We'll meet a guy named Pavia Tobiason, one of Greenland's top rolling competitors, and I got music from a woman named Rina. In preparation for going to the Greenland competition for the first time, I knew there was this event called harpoon throwing, both for distance and accuracy. And in preparing for that, I had to find a harpoon or make a harpoon, which can be done with about a 6 or 8 foot closet dowel. Thing you hang your clothes on in a closet out of wood. And you can sort of carve the ends of that down. And you have to put 2 prongs in it. And then you make a norsok throwing stick and you drill 2 holes in the norsok to match the prongs. And that is what you'll use to launch the harpoon. Other cultures in ancient times used the same idea to throw spears. And the device then was called an Atlatl, working roughly on the same principle. Effectively, it makes your arm about 12 inches longer and gives you that much more leverage to throw something. Well, with a fair amount of trouble, I was able to get a harpoon and matching norsok to the water and keep it there so I didn't have to take it on the bus every time. I also quickly discovered that I had to make something that would serve as an asagi kut. That's the word for the little piece you put on the deck that you rest the harpoon on so it doesn't roll off into the water. And an actual harpoon has a line attached to it that goes to a hunting float at the end. But for competition and for practicing, that just adds unnecessary complexity. But overall, in attempting to figure this stuff out, I realized that the amount of ingenuity and research and development that went into getting a working system going is pretty remarkable. And in attempting to learn the skill, if I were relying on this for survival, I would have starved to death a long time ago. I had a spot in New Jersey on a quiet section of water where I could stash the harpoon in the branches of an overhanging tree, where he was usually there when I came back, and practice throwing again and again. So you put the norsok on the harpoon, and then you launch it, and then you paddle forward to get the harpoon and put it back in the norsok, and then throw it again, and just keep on trying. Now, to just get a good arc, that takes a fair amount of work. And as in competition, you have to throw it so the point hits the water first. You can't do a flat trajectory like a bullet horizontally, because to hunt a seal, the harpoon doesn't go as fast as a bullet, and so the seal would see the harpoon coming at it horizontally and just dip down into the water, and the harpoon would pass overhead. So a proper throw goes up in an arc and then comes straight down, and that way if the seal ducks down into the water, the harpoon still sinks right into the water and hits the seal. Now, to get a good throw with a good arc on it, it really took a lot of experimentation on my part of how to just when to apply the force to it, and it's just a lot of work. And I did, though, once or twice. See, you'll throw the harpoon and it comes like twisted, skewed to the left or skewed to the right or forward or backward, and it sort of flops into the water. And in competition, it can be 45 degrees or less as long as the tip hits the water first. It counts as a throw, but you're not going to get any seals unless the harpoon is coming fairly vertical into the water. And I think twice in hours, days, or a year or two of practice, maybe this only happened 2 times, but it was so beautiful. The harpoon goes up and it comes straight down into the water, and the size of a little bit bigger than a quarter, like that is the total amount of water that's disturbed, because it goes straight in all the way underwater. It's beautiful. It took me hundreds of throws to get that, but I imagine real seal hunters do that every time. So I was practicing in an area that it was 4 or 5 feet deep, depending on where I was, close to the shore, but not real close. And sometimes I would throw, and the harpoon, getting a halfway decent vertical throw, it would go down and would stick into the mud and be, 6 inches of the harpoon sticking out of the water, and then I just go and pull it out of the mud. Or often it'll stick into the mud and for a few seconds, and then just pull itself back out and float up to the top and come back out. And sometimes it'd be a little bit deeper, and it would go in and I wouldn't see it, and then a moment later it would float back up to the surface, and I retrieve it, and throw again. And this water was not really clear, not like Greenland is. You couldn't see it past a few inches. It was all full of just cloudiness. So one time, after many weeks of practicing at this area, we'd paddle out there, take the bus out there, paddle out to that spot, find the harpoon stashed in the trees, and then practice for a while, and put it back, and then paddle home. So I was throwing, and I was probably in where it was, maybe 5 feet or so deep. You can't really tell, the water's so cloudy. And I threw it, and it went down in, all the way submerged into the water, and then I didn't see it anymore. And I waited for it to float back up, and it didn't. And it was stuck in the mud underwater, and I had no idea where it was. I tried to look at the shore and position myself that way, about roughly where it was lost, but you're floating around a little bit. It's very hard to tell. So I tried to feel under the water, but I couldn't find it. Lost the harpoon. No harpoon. So that was rather unfortunate. That curtailed my practice for a while. But I was still practicing rolling. I would go out to that spot and roll, go through the Greenland, the 30 rolls routine, and then paddle where I was going after that. And my roll routine included that is the roll where you take the paddle and hold it under the kayak with one hand on each side, and then you flip the kayak over and you lean the kayak to one side till you dip one blade in the water, and then just sculling, moving the paddle back and forth, you bring the kayak all the way around. It's quite a difficult roll, but it's a very cool looking roll. It's an elegant trick to do with a kayak. So about 2 weeks after losing that harpoon, actually no, let's make it official here. Let me just look in my record, since I've kept track of all these things. So going back, harpoon lost in bottom mud happened on 25th of May 2004. So this is about 2 months before I went to Greenland. And then on the 30th of May, 5 days later, I was going, and this particular time, let's see, on the 25th of May, I've scored my rolls at 250 points, not bad. In that area, I was doing a 250, 240. That was my typical. Every 3 or 4 days, I'm out there going through the whole routine. So on the 30th of May, I'm going through the routine, and I get to and I feel my paddle hit something underwater. And I know that's got to be the harpoon, because I'm in that area. What else could it be? So I quickly stop where I am and look at my position and move my paddle around and hit something again and hit it again and hit it again. And then up floated my harpoon, and I got it back. In trying for distance with a harpoon, I was finding no matter how much you lob it or throw it, you seem to just have this maximum. You try to overpower it, doesn't get any better. You underpower it, doesn't get far enough. But you just get, maybe, for me it was like 10 or 12 feet, and I just couldn't seem to get any more distance on that. I just had to work on the technique some more. The competition rules state that the harpoon must weigh a minimum of 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds. Because if you make a lighter harpoon, you can really get the thing to fly much easier and get much more distance on it. But for an actual harpoon, had to have enough weight to deliver the harpoon head in through the skin of the seal to make a fatal hit, not just bounce off the thing with a light weight harpoon. So it had to have some amount of heft to it. So before they do the harpoon event, everybody has to bring their harpoon, and they have a little scale there, and they weigh them all to make sure they're over 1 kilogram. And I've heard stories of people, trying to skirt the rules, or just trying to give themselves every advantage they can. And I heard tell of, they'll soak the harpoon in water, get it nice and wet, and then bring it to be weighed. And then hopefully it's for another hour or so they don't have to compete. So they're out in the sun trying to dry it as much as possible to make it more light. But that's probably negligible at best, but that's what some people are trying to do. An actual seal hunter would have a rack in front of him that would allow the harpoon line to be coiled up onto it, because it has to pay out carefully so it doesn't get tangled. And they don't use, nobody ties a line to their harpoon in the competition. It just makes it way too complicated. But it's remarkable to think that a seal hunter had to do all that, and there are so many ways to mess up a throw and get that line tangled up on the way out. And even without the line on it, I'd feel it's just so clumsy there with this harpoon and this thing, trying to wield a paddle at the same time. And there's also a rule that says the kayak has to be moving forward as you throw the harpoon. You can't come to a complete stop. So you've got to actually be paddling and then pick up, move the paddle to one hand and then pick up the harpoon. And there's just complex little choreography that has to go on there. And it takes a fair amount of practice. And to do this for really hunting seals, I'm very impressed that people did this successfully. Another misconception I had is that the tuilik, remember the tuilik, the garment it functions as the spray skirt, and it goes up over your head and it's like a hood and fastens around your wrists. So that's made out of seal skin, and the requirements in the competition say that in the Greenlandic class they have to use a sealskin tuilik for the rolling competition. The foreigners in the international class can use a neoprene one. And I was under the impression, not knowing any better, that to make a sealskin tuilik, they're eating seals all the time. It's part of the diet. The hunters are going out and in motorboats with rifles, of course. But so they've got the sealskin. They use that to make these, the clothing that's unfortunately not available in this country. But there's excess sealskin all over the place. So there's no big deal to just throw something together to make a tuilik. But that is not how it works. To get the proper skin for a tuilik, it has to be a certain type of seal. You can't just use any old seal. And you have to get the skin at the right time of year when their skin changes throughout the season, so you need to get it at the right time. And the preparation that goes into that to make it, the stitching as well as the preparing the leather and getting the hair on it, and it's quite a complex process. And not everybody, in fact, only a very few people know the old techniques of how to do that properly. And I've seen in the museums, there's this beautiful, meticulously stitched examples in the museums that are just amazing. But the ones they use in competition aren't nearly of that level. So there's some older women. Women used to do the sewing on that. There's a special stitch to keep it waterproof, and you need the right skin so it's thick enough. It's very, very complicated. So basically, it costs what it would cost to make, I think, 2 or 3 kayaks is what it costs to get one tuilik. They're not cheap articles. So imagine your dry suit costing more than your kayak. That's twice what your kayak costs. That's what it comes down to. Therefore, each kayak club only has a few of these tuilik. Tuislit is the plural of tuilik, and they might just have 2 or 3. And the ones that they do have, they'll try to get as much mileage as they can, and keep patching them up and repairing them as they go, because they're just so expensive and so much trouble to come by in the first place. So I remember the one I borrowed. I told you about the one with the hands that helped me, and there was nobody there. It'll have a little tied up where a hole worn through. They'll just pull it together and tie it around for a patch, or they'll stitch on other things, or the thongs for the wrist things might have gotten loose or broken. The end's broken, and so they're these sort of like patchwork kind of things to make it continue to function, because they're so expensive. They do look very elegant though. That real animal skin, and there's different patterns of white and brown that each one has. Each is unique, and they look really sharp. Well, there's a guy named Pavia Tobiason, and Pavia has an interesting history in kayaking. He's lived in Greenland's biggest town, Nuuk, and he got involved as a teenager, first competing in 1993 at the age of 16. The next year, in 1994, a special event took place in the U.S., and this was a 10-day invitational military kayak paddle race sponsored by the U.S. 10th Special Forces Group This was done along the coast of Maine, and they had something of a symposium beforehand and invited people knowledgeable about kayaking and the kayak industry to come do presentations. And you remember John Heath, who was instrumental in bringing Maligak to the U.S., he was involved back then in 94. And he arranged for them to have 2 Greenland kayakers come from Greenland and bring their kayaks to demonstrate rolling techniques and traditional paddling techniques to the military guys. And Pavia Tobiason was chosen as one of the 2 Greenlanders to come to the U.S. at that time in 1994. Reportedly, the Special Forces personnel were quite fascinated to see Greenland kayaking techniques and understanding things like paddling silently. And the Greenlanders were quite intrigued about trees. They knew about trees, they just hadn't seen one up close before, so they had to experience that. The other Greenlander who went with Pavia was named Uwe Hansen, and he had won that year the men's championship title, the Kayaker title. That's what Maligak later won that many times, but in 94, Maligak was just 12 years old. Uwe Hansen was the champion. So Uwe and Pavia were representing Greenland abroad. When they came back to Greenland from the U.S., they had quite the welcome. It was quite a proud moment for Greenland kayaking to be on the international stage. Well, Pavia went on to have a pretty distinguished career as a kayak competitor. And from the start in 93, he was pretty consistently there, missing maybe a year or 2 in between once in a while, but up until about 2004. And he was one of the top rollers, getting a score in the high 200s. 2003, he got 273 points, his highest. That year, he actually outrolled Maligak for the gold medal. And after 2004, he stopped competing. He probably had family obligations. And was not seen again until 2015. Still competing for Kayak Nuuk team. But that time, in 2015, he was, I guess, a bit out of the rhythm, out of practice. His was down to 49 points in rolling, which is considerably less than his heyday. And the following year, 2016, he had practiced a bit more, and he rolled in the team rolling. That's where you have 3 people in the water. They all have to do the roll successfully for the team to get points for that roll. And I remember that year they were doing the team rolling before they did the individual rolling. So Pavia's team got 90 points, which is not a bad score. Somebody else was the slow person on the team, but I could see that he'd been practicing because he did better than the year before. So I was looking for him to get back up to the 200-point level. Then they had the individual rolling, and Pavia was starting his routine, and he got up to number 7 on the list, which is Kingup Apumajugut. And that one, you've got the paddle behind your back, and it's kind of an awkward position. And he, I guess, pushed the wrong way, pushed too hard, and he managed to dislocate his shoulder. And he was writhing in pain. I forget if they had to bring him up or if he got up by himself. But so he's on the water there, just crying out that it hurts so bad. And they come over, and nobody was able to, have the technique to get it back in, or it just wasn't working. Sometimes you can pop someone's shoulder back in place, and sometimes not. So they carried his kayak onto land. They managed to get him out, but they had to call an ambulance to come to take him to the hospital. So people were very concerned for 2 reasons. 1, they were concerned about Pavia, that he would be okay. And 2, he was wearing one of the brand new tuliks that Kayak Nuuk had just had made through that painstaking and expensive technique. And they were worried that in the hospital, the doctor, you got to get the guy's clothes off to get to the shoulder. They were just going to take the shears out and cut the brand new tulik, which cost the price of several kayaks, and ruin it. But later on, when Pavia got out of the hospital, just a few hours later, they'd managed to get the shoulder back in place, and he was okay. And I guess in Greenland, the doctors know something about a tuilik. They had managed to take the tuilik off without damaging it. So they saved the tuilik, and Pavia was okay. Now, if you recall, in a previous episode, I talked about the first time I went to Greenland and how clear I found the water to be. Could see all the way down to the bottom while I practiced rolling. Well, in competition, they often have it alongside a dock or an area next in a marina where there are motorboats going by, and maybe people have cleaned the seals they've caught. So you'll have on the surface of the water a greasy, oily residue of either gasoline or seal guts or who knows what, fish oil. And I would have imagined they would move the competition, or they would make some effort to have a clean place to do the rolling, but they don't. If it's whatever gunk is in the water, you're rolling in it. Sorry, that's the way it is. I suppose that is a bit of a real-world rolling conditions for combat situations. You can't decide you're not going to tip over if the water's not nice enough. You could tip over anywhere. And when they lay out the race courses for the competition, it depends on the wind and other factors, and different towns have a different layout, so they have to decide, let's go out this way this time and take a right down here and come around, and you have to set up the buoys for where the race is going to go. And one year, Maligiak told me, I think we were in Nuuk, and he said, well, it goes out to the left and down along the side there, and then it passes the chocolate factory and then goes on beyond that and comes back around. And I thought, oh, there's a chocolate factory in Greenland. Wow, that's I didn't know that. That's interesting. And then I thought about it. I said, wait, there's no chocolate manufacturing going on in Greenland. I think I know what he's talking about. And later on he said, yeah, do not roll your kayak next to the chocolate factory. You will be sorry. So yes, every town in Greenland has a quote-unquote chocolate factory, where it is not recommended anyone roll a kayak in that area. The list of rolls, which in 2004 was 30 rolls and is up to 35 rolls now. In the early days it started, I think there was just 10 rolls, but initially there was no time limit. You could roll and then take a rest, or get out and let the water out of your kayak, dry yourself off, warm yourself up a little bit, get back in the water. And when there was just 10 rolls on the list, it didn't take all that long, even with a lot of rest in the middle. But as they added rolls and people really took liberties with resting up and drying off, it started to take way too long to hold the competition. So they decided you have 30 minutes to do all the rolls on the list, and you cannot get out of your kayak. You have to stay in the kayak. And they went even further than that. They said your tuilik, the sealskin garment that covers over the cockpit, or your spray skirt, if you're going to use something else, that has to stay on the cockpit. If you open that up, you're done. And not only that, if it slips off somehow while you're competing, that would be the equivalent of, say, out hunting seals where it slipped off, which is pretty much not just the end of hunting seals. That could be fatal. Your kayak floods, it sinks, end of game. So they decided to make the rule that if you're rolling and if your tuilik comes off, you are done competing. Not only are you done competing, you get a score of 0, disqualified, nothing. No matter how high a point value you had at that point, you are disqualified totally if the tuilik comes off. Now in this country with neoprene, we don't see that problem very often unless somebody deliberately takes their tuilik off, but because the neoprene is stretchy, so it'll just stretch on. But in Greenland, it doesn't stretch very much, And since the tuishlit are custom made to fit a kayak, one kayak, but then you have to apply to other kayaks since they're trading, they're borrowing the kayak for various different kayaks. So some kayaks it goes on kind of loose, and others it's way too tight. So on the loose ones, that's when it may accidentally slip off and you get disqualified, which is a real letdown for somebody who's been practicing so hard. But they don't fool around. It comes off, disqualified, no score. Another rule that isn't seen very often with fiberglass and plastic kayaks is that the deck lines, the lines across the deck that you can slide a paddle underneath. Since in Greenland those are made of sealskin. Remember they told Sherry Perry in 2004 to be in the Greenlandic class she had to have sealskin deck lines. Well, if during the competition, say you're rolling and you go to the hand or the Norsok rolls and you slide your paddle underneath the deck lines, if one of those deck lines breaks off, that the sealskin comes apart and does no longer attach to the kayak, you are instantly disqualified. And they don't fool around with that. That's a rule. In this country with nylon, we never really see that because the nylon's much stronger. But the sealskin ones, the deck line comes off, no score in that event. Sometimes it's nerve-wracking to try to keep these rules straight when you're competing, especially when they decide to change the rules from year to year. But that's Greenland. Our musical selection this week comes from a woman named Rina. And this is more contemporary, done in the last couple of years. The album is called Unnuaru, Greenlandic for tonight. Now, if you remember in episode 15, I had a band called Susat and a guy named John Sandgren who put that vocal effect on his voice all the way through. Well, Rina hangs out with those guys. In fact, John Sandgren wrote all the music on Rina's CD, and he actually sings some backup vocals on this selection. Unfortunately, at least unfortunately for me, in my opinion, he still has that effect on his voice. It's like his thing. He always has that sound. So I'm gonna do you a version of this song without any of those embellishments, electronic on the voice. This is Isumakarama, which translates to thoughts or thinking, or maybe I'm thinking, something like that. And this is Rina off of her album. Well, this isn't Rina, but it's her song off of her album Unnuaru, or Tonight.
Isumakarama kokesina yumashutit neriute karama kadishde kelaru mashutit umati mami Bisigisto se kafe gimatit Sanekuta wena romanatit Bishluati gimatit Soruna alane pinga So mi vanne pinga Soruna alane pinga So mi vanne pinga Tisagumami Tatigisa pinga Estigisa pinga Asayu asane pinga Musigi gama Asane kashdunga uperi sana pinga utisagaru aroma soruna alame pinga somini manne pinga soruna alame pinga somini manne pinga Uanit pavine kastutit Uanit pavine kastutit Uanit pavine kastutit Uanit pavine kastutit
Song is called Isumakarama. Artist is Rina, and the album is Unnuaru. Now, if you've been not listening to all the previous podcasts and just dropped in on this one, or if it's been a while since you kept track of what I've said before, let me bring you up to date. I do not play the original versions of these songs because the idea is to get you to go buy the music from the original artist and support them in that way, due to the fact that it is very difficult for a Greenlandic musician to make a living and they need all the support they can get. So I have made my own versions of these songs, which are not nearly as good as the original, but that's to encourage you to go to a website called atlanticmusic.gl and look up these CDs. And you can order them right online there, and they will mail it to you anywhere in the world. So that's what I'd like you to do. And check out Rina on atlanticmusic.gl. Coming up in DUBCAST number 18, I will tell you all about my experiences in a place up in the northwest corner of the country near Seattle called Deception Pass, where the current reaches up to 6 or 7 knots. And there's a guy up there named Warren Williamson. Thank you for listening to the DUBCAST with Dubside.